Bonjour, bienvenue sur la chaîne YouTube d'Eton Works.
Hello and welcome to the Ditton Works YouTube channel. Today I'm going to talk about a product from Atoll Electronique. I have got two components to review, but I'm going to do them separately. And the reason being is I wanted to see individually how these components had an effect on my setup. So the first component we're going to talk about is the DAC-300. Now, Atoll Electronique is a French company which was started by Stéphane and Emmanuel de. Very difficult to say. I probably butchered that. Anyway, they're a French company and their mission statement, if you like, was to truly produce high-end electronic components at affordable prices. Now, I have a DAC in my system. It's here, and it's a benchmark DAC-1. Now the reason, and this is going to be part of this video, but the reason I chose this DAC is it's often used in professional recording studios and is renowned for its neutral sonic characteristics. In other words, it really doesn't have any. And it was good for me because it meant I was able to evaluate loudspeakers, certainly in the digital domain, without any coloration, if you like, to the signal. So I was getting as near as damn it the sort of true representation of the signal coming through, so I could evaluate the loudspeakers. Now that has had a bit of a detrimental effect in one way to the sonic characteristics of my system, is it is very neutral. So it's beneficial that the neutrality helps me identify sonic characteristics of loudspeakers, but I will be the first one to admit that my setup requires fairly musical loudspeakers or fairly musical additional front end equipment, i.e. in the analog side of things, to bring out some of that musicality. I don't mind that, I'm used to that, and like I said, they kind of rectify the problem. This does present some other interesting conundrums really. Should a DAC have a voice? Should a DAC be able to add or subtract anything from the sonic characteristics of one's setup? So to answer that question, purists would probably say no. A DAC shouldn't be able to add or subtract anything from the signal. But the quandary, the issue is, how would you know? Unless you're going to continually switch between pieces of equipment to try and establish which was the most faithful to the original source, you're never really going to know. And even then, would you really know that it was faithful to the original source unless you can A/B switch your hi-fi setup to the original band in the original studio, playing that track exactly the same as you're recording? Not really possible. So I'm going to forget about that and just mention the fact that if that DAC in your system makes everything sound good, that's all that should really matter. Now let's talk about the DAC-300 specifically. It has every conceivable connection that you would need. Importantly for me, it's got balanced outs, so I can run my setup using my existing cables, and it's a literal switch in and out. The other thing is you can use the Atoll DAC-300 as a preamp. Now I can do that with the benchmark DAC-1. You adjust it with the volume here if you change the configuration on the back. Now, as I said in another video, a remote control isn't a deal breaker for me because I tend to set the volume and leave it at that. But if I have to keep getting up to switch input selection, so if I'm listening to a CD and then want to go to streaming, I have to get up and switch that manually. With the Atoll, you don't, because it's got a remote control. And you can use it as a preamp, and that's a great idea because it's taking another box out of the system. And I've got to say, although I'm not using it as preamp configuration today, I've got to say as a preamp it's very good. It really is very good. So you've got your DAC and preamp in one box. As a straight DAC, which is how I'm running it at the minute, I'm using my Node 2i coaxially into the back of the Atoll DAC-300 and using it as a DAC. The CD transport is coming out balanced XLR cable into the back of the DAC and then into my preamp and then into my power amp. Now the biggest and most important difference between this and the Atoll Electronique DAC is the Atoll DAC can handle high-res files. The Benchmark can't. It just can't. And that has opened my eyes to the world of high-res files because they sound simply stunning. Absolutely brilliant. CD sounds phenomenal. Absolutely brilliant. It's taken everything up a level. And this ties in with that, should a DAC add or subtract anything? Because I would say that the Atoll DAC-300 is adding something to the system, but it's such a good addition. Its musicality, its listenability. It's got a very quiet black background. It's very, very clean sounding digital files. Although my CD player is pretty analog sounding CD transport, digital files sound brilliant, especially the high res ones. That's a big area of potential playback that I've not really been able to explore to the highest potential because my DAC limited that. Now I will say that if I played high-res files it just sounded like a very good recording, but now it sounds phenomenal, absolutely brilliant. So connectivity is fantastic, usability is fantastic, adjustability is fantastic, you've got filtering systems in there. I've not really dived into any of those because straight out of the box as a DAC it sounded fantastic, and adjusting it to sound as a preamp sounded fantastic. It's one of those pieces of equipment that I would probably endlessly find ways of making it sound even better. With the addition of a remote control, that is perfect. Instruction manual, very simplistic, very easy to read, very easy to follow, and basically this piece of equipment will do everything you need in the digital side of things. So as I mentioned, I have got two Atoll Electronique components to review, a DAC and a streamer. But the reason I wanted to do the DAC separately and first is I wanted to see what its impact on my system was. So the Node 2i is a fantastic value for money piece of equipment. It gets you streaming straight away. But I've got to say its onboard DAC is nowhere near the level of this Atoll Electronique DAC. It's just night and day difference. It sounds way, way better. And in the next video, when I review their streamer, I will then revert back to my benchmark DAC to see how that component has affected my system. Because if I just put both bits in at once, it's going to be impossible for me to tell you how each individual component has had an impact on my setup. There is only one negative I'm going to mention about the Atoll Electronique DAC-300. Where my hi-fi sits, and this is a very small complaint, where my hi-fi sits, sunlight, natural light does come through the room and hit the hi-fi. And at certain times of the day on the display you can actually see through the glass or plastic on the front the infrared sensor for the remote control, and you can see through into some of the electronic components. That's a very small complaint, but I think for just slightly better quality or more tinted plastic or glass over the display would have hidden that a little bit better. That's my only complaint, and it's a very small one at that, because sonically this is a phenomenal piece of equipment. Take care guys, I'll catch up with you soon.